responsible for at least the deaths of 500 Americans, and now they're moving them over to Afghanistan.
That's from a documentary. It's called Iranium. It looks at Iran's human rights abuses and that country's extremely controversial nuclear program. The film was supposed to be screened last night. The National Library and Archives Canada here in Ottawa, it was canceled after pressure from the Iranian embassy, fears of protests, and finally when suspicious letters showed up at the library and the hazmat team was called in. Now the Heritage Minister is forcing the show to go on again, but should a federal minister intervene in a case like this? And why did public servants bend to the will of another government, even if there were safety concerns? Joining me now is the Heritage Minister, James Moore. Minister Moore, good to see you.
Pleasure.
What exactly happened at the Library and Archives with this film? And we're looking at the poster, Iranium.
Well, I got an email on Monday from Fred Litwin, who had an agreement with Library and Archives Canada to show this movie at Library and Archives Canada. I should say, by the way, I haven't seen the movie, so I'm not advocating for the movie. I'm advocating in favor of Library and Archives Canada maintaining their commitment to a Canadian to show a film at a Canadian institution. So there's that. Okay. So he emailed me and said, I had an agreement with Library and Archives Canada. Library and Archives Canada has backed out of the agreement. And I said, well, why? And they said, well, because the Iranian embassy complained that they didn't want this film to be shown at Library and Archives. So I contacted Library and Archives Canada. I said, is this true? And they said, yeah, we don't want the film. We're not going to show the film now. Why? We've received complaints from the Iranian embassy, which I think is outrageous. So they originally had canceled the film, and I urged them, and I said, let's not cancel the film. You maintain your agreement with a Canadian to show a film. You just maintain your agreement. And you're not going to be, by the way, dictated to by the embassy, the Iranian embassy here in Ottawa, about what kind of films are going to be shown in Canada and what kind of films are going to be shown in a Government of Canada institution.
So you're saying that a complaint from the Iranian embassy here in Canada to the National Library and Archives for this film got the film canceled?
Correct.
Just like that?
Just like that. I contacted Library and Archives Canada, and I said, that's not responsible. That's irresponsible. This is, the Iranian embassy is not going to dictate to us what films are or are not shown in Canada, and they're certainly not going to dictate to an agency of the Government of Canada what's going to be shown in a Government of Canada building. So then they relented, and Library and Archives Canada said, the movie is back on.
Showing tonight?
Showing that night, yes. Right. Then they backed off a second time because they said that there were some security threats against them.
That's right.
So here we are now, the day after the movie was supposed to be shown. It was supposed to be shown last night. And I contacted Library and Archives this morning, and I said, this is not going to happen again. Library and Archives Canada has a responsibility to maintain your agreement with a Canadian and show this film as you promised and committed yourself to do. And by the way...
Just for the record, they told us they had security threats. What about that? Is that legitimate?
Well, if there's a security threat, there's a security threat, and these things need to be taken into account, of course. However, we cannot buckle to pressure, A, from the Iranian embassy, and B, because somebody threatens violence, it doesn't mean they get their way. When somebody makes threats, they have to be dealt with seriously and responsibly by the authorities. And here in Parliament Hill, the CRCMP or Parliament Hill Security, they have to be dealt with responsibly. But we don't. This is not a country where the loudest voice, the biggest threat of violence, gets their way. We believe in free speech. We believe in democracy, and we don't believe in censorship against films because people don't happen to like what's in it. And by the way, I would say, as I said, I haven't seen this film, but I know what I believe, and I know what Prime Minister Harper and our government believes, which is free speech and not being dictated to by the Iranian government or by those who threaten violence.
All right. Now, we tried to contact the Iranian embassy. They gave us no response on this, although they did contact Sun Media, and they said this, and I'll just read you the quote. We went through the material, elaborating on the contents of this film, the fundraising activity envisaged, and the individuals involved, feeling that this is not a balanced exercise and gives a one-sided, distorted picture of the raised issues. This is contrary to the Canadian values and approach. You talked to the charge d'affaires at the Iranian embassy. Have they contacted you?
They've contacted me. They hand-delivered a letter that had the exact same message. And by the way, not interested in being lectured to by the regime of Mr. Ahmadinejad about free speech, about tolerance, about what's appropriate discourse in a country. In our democracy, we believe in free speech. We believe in allowing films to be shown. We don't believe in censoring films. We don't believe in bullying people into not showing films because we don't happen to believe in their content. There are plenty of films and videos that are shown in this country that are very critical of our government, that have been critical of Jean Chrétien's government, of Paul Martin's government, of Pierre Trudeau's government, and Brian Mulroney's government. These films are shown all the time. They're shown on the CBC. They're shown on our public broadcaster. Why? Because in Canada, we believe in free speech. We believe in discourse, we believe in dissent, and the Iranian government clearly doesn't. And they've reacted violently in the past against those who speak out freely against the Iranian government, but they're not going to bully me, and they're not going to bully Stephen Harper, and they're not going to bully our government when we believe in allowing free speech and movies to be shown in Canadian institutions.
And now this is, as you say, government-run institution. Now, Clarion Fund, which funds this film and produced this is a founded by a guy named Raphael Shore in 2006. He's also the founder of Imagination, a distributor of films relating to Jewish education and Jerusalem Online University. And as we understand, Clarion Fund has backed other films like Obsession, Radical Islam's War Against the West, The Third Jihad, Radical Islam's Vision for America. So a question, forget the Iranian point of view and that they tried to bully an institution. I get that. Are you concerned by coming out? I know you say you don't support the film, but here you are strongly advocating that it should be shown, that it may play into anti-Islam propaganda. I haven't seen those films either.
Well, before we label this film or any of those other films in that regard, I haven't seen them. You haven't seen them, so let's not comment on the films, eh? I mean, I haven't seen those films.
But right, so is it dangerous to rush to the defense of it if you haven't seen them?
Well, I'm rushing to the defense of free speech, and I'm rushing to the defense of those people who had an agreement with Library and Archives to show the film. There was an agreement. And why did Library and Archives back down? They backed down ultimately because of the threat of violence. And that's wrong.
Was it a threat to the Iranians? Was it a threat of, I mean, I know there's a security element, but they backed down first and foremost to please, it sounds like, to please the Iranian embassy.
And this is why I'm so energized about this. They backed down twice. Once to threats that were not full, that were we don't know how serious they were or not. But we have an RCMP force that we pay a lot of taxpayers' money for. We have security in the national capital. We have resources that are available to protect people from those who would do us harm. And because some people may not like a film and make some threats, you know, those threats need to be investigated. People need to be kept safe. But we don't back down to people who try to censor people by threats of violence, number one. The other back down with the original one was one because the Iranian embassy in Ottawa tried to censor a Canadian organization from showing a documentary film. I believe in free speech across the board.
So
I don't believe in censoring people's ability to show movies.
Will someone at the Library and Archives pay for this in terms of a job? What's the accountability when a senior institution, a serious institution, showing a film is clearly bending to the will of a foreign government in terms of programming what it shows?
Well, they have not, and they will not. They did in this circumstance, but I instructed them this morning. This movie will be shown. The agreement will be kept, and this movie, Iranium, will be shown at Library and Archives Canada. And by the way, we're not moving it to a different facility. We're not buckling to any pressure.
Is there safety concern? Will there be increased security?
If that's needed, it'll be taken into account. But the movie will be shown at Library and Archives Canada. And as I said, we're not going to buckle to those who want to stifle free speech or intimidate people from daring to disagree with the Iranian government.
You are mad.
I'm a mad believer in free speech, and I'm a mad believer in standing up to those who want to stifle free speech and impose standards of expectations that people will just back off and not publicly disagree with the Iranian government. I believe in democracy, and that requires debate, and that requires dissent, and it requires governments that tolerate free speech, governments like those of Stephen Harper and our government.
All right. So Iranium shows tonight. And
not tonight, but in the future when it's...
In the future, okay.
Yeah.
All right, Minister Moore, we'll leave it there. Thanks for coming on.
Pleasure's mine.
I want to just give you an update that we're just learning here. Government sources telling us that the Canadian government has just sent a diplomatic note to Iran, and I'll just apparently conveying that Canada is a free country and freedom of expression is integral to Canadian values. So now the government has sent a note to the Iranian government on that. So this story is reaching up at higher levels.